A nation divided, the Syrian Civil War. The Syrian Civil War, raging since 2011, is a complex and devastating conflict that has torn the nation apart. It began with peaceful protests against the authoritarian rule of President Bashar al-Assad. However, the government's brutal crackdown on dissent fueled an armed uprising. The conflict quickly escalated into a full-blown civil war, drawing in various factions, each with its own agenda. Key players in this multifaceted war include the Syrian government, supported by Russia and Iran, and various rebel groups, some backed by Western powers, and others with ties to extremist organizations. The emergence of ISIS in the region further complicated the situation, adding another layer of brutality to the already devastating conflict. The Syrian people have been caught in the crossfire of this brutal war. Millions have been displaced from their homes, seeking refuge in neighboring countries, or within Syria itself. The conflict has created one of the worst humanitarian crises of our time, leaving an indelible scar on the nation and its people. As we delve deeper into the dark side of Syria, we will explore the devastating consequences of this protracted conflict, from the human rights abuses to the economic collapse and the uncertain future that lies ahead. Scars of war. Human rights abuses in Syria. The Syrian civil war has been marred by widespread human rights abuses perpetrated by all sides of the conflict. The Assad regime, in its brutal crackdown on dissent, has been accused of crimes against humanity. These include the use of chemical weapons on civilians, torture, extrajudicial killings, and enforced disappearances. Rebel groups, too, have been implicated in serious human rights violations, including the use of child soldiers, indiscriminate attacks on civilian areas, and kidnappings. The rise of ISIS in the region further exacerbated the situation, with the group becoming infamous for its brutal executions, sexual slavery, and persecution of minorities. The Syrian people have endured unimaginable suffering. Families have been torn apart, homes destroyed, and lives shattered. The physical and psychological scars of war run deep, leaving many with lasting trauma. The international community has condemned the atrocities committed in Syria, but accountability remains elusive. A nation in need, the humanitarian crisis. The Syrian civil war has triggered a catastrophic humanitarian crisis. Years of relentless fighting have devastated infrastructure, crippled the economy, and displaced millions. Basic necessities like food, clean water, shelter, and healthcare are scarce, leaving millions vulnerable. Children are among the most vulnerable victims of this crisis. Many have witnessed unspeakable violence, lost loved ones, and been forced to flee their homes. They face hunger, disease, lack of education, and the threat of exploitation and abuse. The United Nations estimates that over 14 million people inside Syria require humanitarian assistance. The situation is particularly dire in besieged areas, where access for aid organizations is severely restricted. The international community has responded with humanitarian aid, but the needs are overwhelming. Crumbling foundations, economic collapse in Syria. The Syrian economy has been ravaged by the civil war. Years of conflict have decimated infrastructure, disrupted trade, and led to massive capital flight. The Syrian pound has plummeted in value, leading to hyperinflation and making basic goods unaffordable for many. Unemployment is rampant, and poverty has skyrocketed. Many Syrians struggle to feed their families and meet their basic needs. The agricultural sector, once a pillar of the Syrian economy, has been severely impacted, leading to food shortages and soaring prices. The Syrian government, grappling with international sanctions and a depleted treasury, has limited capacity to address the economic crisis. The situation is exacerbated by corruption and mismanagement. The economic collapse has had a devastating impact on the lives of ordinary Syrians, pushing many further into poverty and despair. An uncertain future, political instability. The future of Syria remains shrouded in uncertainty. While the Assad regime, with Russian and Iranian backing, has regained control over much of the country, pockets of resistance remain. A fragile ceasefire is in place in some areas, but the threat of renewed violence persists. The country is deeply divided, with sectarian tensions and political rivalries fueling instability. The presence of foreign powers, each pursuing its own interests, further complicates the situation. The international community is divided on how to approach the Syrian crisis. Efforts to find a political solution have been largely unsuccessful. The lack of a unified strategy has hindered progress towards peace and stability. The Syrian people, yearning for peace and stability, face an uncertain future. The road to recovery and reconciliation will be long and arduous. Ripples of conflict, geopolitical implications. The Syrian civil war has had profound geopolitical implications, reverberating far beyond the country's borders. The conflict has fueled regional instability, exacerbated the refugee crisis, and heightened tensions between global powers. The rise of ISIS in Syria and its subsequent spread to neighboring Iraq sent shockwaves through the region and beyond. The group's brutal tactics and extremist ideology posed a significant threat to regional and international security. The conflict also triggered an unprecedented refugee crisis, with millions of Syrians fleeing to neighboring countries like Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey, straining resources and exacerbating social and economic challenges in host communities. The flow of refugees into Europe also fueled political tensions and anti-immigrant sentiment. The Syrian conflict also became a proxy war, with Russia, Iran, the United States, and other powers backing different sides. This external involvement prolonged the conflict and hindered efforts to find a peaceful solution. Stories of resilience, human faces of the Syrian crisis. Amidst the devastation and despair, stories of resilience, courage, and hope emerge from the Syrian crisis. Ordinary Syrians facing unimaginable hardships continue to exhibit remarkable strength and determination. Doctors and nurses working tirelessly in bombed-out hospitals risk their lives to provide medical care to those in need. Teachers, determined to ensure that education continues despite the conflict, hold classes in makeshift schools in refugee camps and basements of destroyed buildings. Families, torn apart by war, cling to hope of reunification. Parents make perilous journeys to provide a better future for their children. Children, despite witnessing horrors no child should ever see, dream of peace and a brighter future. These stories of resilience remind us of the indomitable spirit of the human spirit, even in the face of unimaginable adversity. A call for action. Supporting the Syrian people. The Syrian people, facing a multitude of challenges, desperately need our support. The international community must prioritize efforts to end the violence, alleviate the humanitarian crisis, and support Syria's long-term recovery and reconstruction. Humanitarian aid is crucial to address the immediate needs of millions of Syrians affected by the conflict. This includes providing food, clean water, shelter, healthcare, and education. Supporting the work of humanitarian organizations operating in Syria and neighboring countries is essential. These organizations play a vital role in delivering aid, providing medical care, and protecting vulnerable populations. Advocating for a political solution to the conflict is also crucial. The international community must work towards a negotiated settlement that addresses the root causes of the conflict and paves the way for a peaceful and stable future. Conclusion. A glimmer of hope amidst the ruins. The Syrian civil war stands as a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict and the devastating consequences of unchecked violence. The conflict has left an indelible scar on Syria, its people, and the region. Yet amidst the ruins, there is a glimmer of hope. The resilience of the Syrian people, the tireless efforts of humanitarian workers, and the continued calls for peace offer a faint beacon of light in the darkness. The international community must not turn away from the plight of the Syrian people. A concerted and sustained effort to end the violence, alleviate the humanitarian crisis, and support Syria's long-term recovery is essential. The path to peace and stability will be long and arduous, but it is a journey we must undertake together. The future of Syria and the well-being of its people depend on it.